The Marine Canvas Training Institute presents its video classroom series. In this tape, Don Wedge will take you through the design of a spray hood, including measuring in the boat, bending the frame, patterning the top on the boat, and working the pattern in preparation for cutting the fabric. Now here's the Marine Canvas Training Institute's president, Don Wedge.
What we're going to try to show you today is how to design a spray hood for a center console fishing boat. Now there's very little difference between a spray hood on a power boat and a Dodger on a sailboat. They're basically the same thing, just called different things on different kinds of boats. But all of the moves and all of the design problems, with the exception of very few on a sailboat, are the same. So I'm going to proceed to show you how that we would go ahead and build a spray hood on this particular boat. Now what a spray hood is something that stops the spray from the bow coming up over the bow and hitting the helmsman back here. It's also a place to store gear, a place to get in out of if you're out fishing and the wind's blowing and you're anchored, you want to get in where it's warm, that's where you get. So normally a spray hood or a Dodger, either one, will very seldom ever be over 60 inches off of the deck, and that's where I'm standing. The purpose of a spray hood or a Dodger is to protect the helmsman from the wind and the waves and the water. That's why they're called a Dodger, because you dodge the waters that comes aboard the boat. And you do the same thing on a power boat. But you also have to be able to see over them, because if you can't see over them, you don't know what you're going to hit. Because when you put salt water on clear vinyl in a Dodger or a spray hood, you can't see through it. So you always want to be able to see over it. So we work on the premise that we need to be somewhere 60 inches off of the deck, because the average guy, that would hit him right square in the chin. Now we do customize ours to fit the customer. If he's a little short guy, we make it shorter. If he's a big tall guy, we may make it taller. But we do get involved with the customer real close on these for this reason. We don't do them cheap. We get top dollar for them. We normally use nothing but 1-inch stainless steel for the framework, and that's what we're going to be working with here today, because that's the only thing that I've found that will stand up to the grief of plowing this boat through a wave head first. I have a tool here for measuring which relates to my bender, which is the Bend Right bender. It's one that we sell in the school. There are many benders on the market. Back when I wanted a bender, there were none on the market, so I had to design my own. So I came up with a bender that will bend a frame for any product, for any boat that I ever have to build a frame for. It's called a Bend Right bender. Every bender has its own formula that goes along with it. And if you have other benders, I'll be very glad to help you figure out the formula. But for purposes of this demonstration and you learning, we're going to use the Bend Right, and we're going to use the formula that goes with it. And here's what the formula is, which we'll get to later in the tape as to how it works. But we have to know three things to design a frame for a boat. We have to know the leg length of the frame, and we have to know the layout width of the frame and the mounting width of the frame. Back when I designed a bender, I had forgotten all my geometry. I never have been very good at making scale drawings, because when you make a scale drawing, if you're going to make a scale drawing of the product that you're going to build, you have to build a scale drawing of the boat. Consequently, you get into a big project. So I came up with a simple little way of measuring for my bender so that I can design any frame in about 5 minutes on a boat. And this is called a bent tent pole. What it is, it was bent on the Bend Right bender. It has a mark on it. It was put on it before it was bent, and it represents the same mark that's on the bender, which represents the leg length. Consequently, in this system of bending, the leg length is the dimension from this mark around the corner to the end of the tube, wherever that may be. But this is a quick and dirty way of measuring for a frame and coming up with a leg length real fast and a layout width real fast. Why? Because boats aren't built plumb level and square. They're built crooked. So we have to establish where the center line is on the boat. Then a combination of using this mark on the bent tent pole and the center line, we can come up with exactly how wide this frame has to be laid out. The reason it's on a tent pole, it's extendable so that if I'm working on a bigger boat and I want to set it on the boat and find out how high something is going to be, I can hold it up here. It's a sales tool as well as a measuring tool, and it's the best sales tool I've ever found. Because the average customer will call you and they'll say, I need a product built for my boat. They don't even know what they're talking about. But with this tent pole, I can walk out and say, sir, there's what you're going to have. And here's all the things I found out just holding this tent pole up here. I found out that I'm at about a 45-degree angle to the plane of the boat where I'm going to mount it, which is the strongest way. I know that I'll have another frame coming out this way at a 90-degree angle, which is strong again. So these are all the things that this will do for me, not only measuring, but it's a monkey see, monkey do thing so that I can set it up and say to the customer, this is what your product's going to look like. The first thing we have to do is establish the center line on this boat. The way we'll do that is by triangulating from a fixed point on the boat that is symmetrical to this boat on both sides. This particular boat, I've picked a spot back here on the gunnel that was built into the gunnel as part of the mold so that I know that it's symmetrical with the other side of the boat. So what I'm doing is measuring from that point on the mold up to the front combing here, and I'm putting a pencil mark. As I cross the center line, I'm going to pencil mark here at 135¼ inches. Now I'm going to move over and put the ruler on the other side of the boat at the same point and measure up, and where 135 intersects the combing, I'm going to put another mark. Now that's measuring across the center lines. Then what I do is measure between those two marks, and that will give me my exact center line. On designing a spray hood, I look at the boat, and I think in an earlier tape we've talked about the fact that when I walk up to the boat, I have a vision of a rectangle in my head, and I have to create a product to cover that rectangle. So what I was looking for was height, length, and width. And I have that same rectangle in my head when I come up to this spray hood. It has to be X amount of inches long, X amount of inches wide, and so high. We've already discussed the fact that it's going to be roughly 60 inches off the deck, or what makes the boat look good. And I'm more concerned about that sometimes than I am everything else, because the product that I build has to make the boat look better than when I started out. Otherwise, there's no point in doing it. Plus, that's my advertising tool that I use. So when I walk up to this boat, I look at it, and I have a step inside here. This spray hood should come no further aft than this step, or maybe 6 inches aft of it. And why? So that when it stops here, the customer can walk around it. This is a fishing machine. It's a center console. He wants to be able to walk around it to go fishing. He also wants to be able to duck under it to get a cold beer. So that's why we built it, so he can do all these things, okay? So now we've established a tentative length. And that tentative length is from the forward edge of this combing to the edge of this step back here, which is approximately 60 inches. And again, don't get all hung up on 1/4 inches, 1/2 inches. Go to the nearest inch, and we may vary it by 6 inches, depending on what makes the boat look good. But the rules of the game are this. In determining the length of this product, what we're trying to figure out is how to build a frame to hold the thing up. And we have to have it so that it looks nice up forward. And sometimes I'll get on the boat with my ruler, and right now I'm just shaping that for the benefit of the customer and myself, to get an idea in my head of what it is I want to build. Now what I've done already, if you look at my ruler here, it's representing the shape of the finished product. Now you're going to say, well, how high off the floor is it? Well, I'm not even going to move this arm only a little bit, but I'm probably at about 54 inches right off the deck, right there. You'll learn over a period of time where different parts of your body are, and you'll use those for measurements when it's figuring height. I know that my chin is 60 inches off the deck. I know that my armpit's about 54. Well, what I'm doing is holding my ruler up like this, which represents the configuration of the finished product, right? Right. Again, we're working with a short frame, so when I look at this, I'm looking from 24 inches to 70 inches. So let's find a halfway point on that. That would be 47 inches.
That's good. Now you can see.
But if you look at half of this dimension right here, get an eyeball of that down here on the combing, and that will be the tentative spot that you will mount your frame. And all I'm going to do is put a pencil mark there. We use a big black hairy lead pencil because you can put a pencil mark on the boat and it cleans off real well. Don't use Sharpies or magic markers because they don't clean off. But what I've established now is a tentative mounting point. I look at the boat, where am I going to store this? There's only one place to store it, and it's up here on this forward combing. I can't store it back here, and I can't store it on stanchions, and I can't store it up in the air because I couldn't fish around it. So it's got to lay down up here. So I lay my tent pole up here on the combing, lay it on the combing here, lay it on the mounting point here, and you'll notice the tent pole's too long. That's why we use it, because it's adjustable, or you can take it apart and it becomes shorter, right? All right, now it's too short, but I got a couple of fingers here. So what I'm going to do is just hold it like this and say, if I were to store it here, and if I were to bring it up like this, would I have what I was trying to achieve? And yeah, I got it pretty close, right? I bring it over here and I say, if I were to put it over here, would I achieve what I want for coverage on the aft end? Yeah, it's pretty close. Okay, so at least I got a place to start mounting the frame. I've got a place to store it. Now, why did I put it with the main frame? And let me explain main frame. Main frame is the frame that attaches the framework to the boat. The next frame is the secondary frame, and any ones in between are called the mid frames. The reason that I put this on the boat like this is this. The main frame has got to be on the bottom of the pile when you're in the storage position on any product that you build. Why? Because if you had the main frame aft and the secondary frame swinging off of that, you'd have a jaw slide right here. And when you laid the frame down like this, the jaw slide would dig into the boat long before the frames ever got to the combing. Now you got a mad customer because it's tearing his boat up. So remember this, that when you're designing framework, they've always got to have the main frame on the bottom of the pile so it's not digging in the boat with the fittings. Okay? Now I've achieved storage, tentative mounting point, and I want to get just a little bit more accurate than that. And let's say that I decide I want to be 54 inches off of the deck back here. I've already got 10 inches. So I need the frame to be 44 inches off of this deck where I'm kneeling, right? So I can set my ruler at 44 inches. And I can take my tent pole and hold it together like this. Grab the leg length and swing it up into place until I hit 44 inches in height off of the deck that I'm kneeling on. Now I may not be right on the money as to what I want, but I'm so close that I would probably gamble it and go with it. Now, I'm going to tell you one thing about my system of bending and my system of measuring. It's not real scientific. It's kind of the farm boy way of doing it, but that's what I am as a farmer anyway. So I do it this way because I'll guarantee you this, that if you use my system of measuring and bending, you'll never come up short on your frames. You may have to cut them off once, but it's a lot better to have to cut it off than it is to try to add 1 inch back on again. So that's why we use this system. And while you're looking for a piece of graph paper to make a scale drawing, I've gone through all this process that I've just done, and I got my frames almost ready to start bending. So I've got the height that I want here. I've got the mounting point. I've established the leg length. And how did I do it? Took my ruler and laid it down around this frame. Let's start down here because I'm holding these two frames together. There's the leg length start, okay? I don't have only two hands, so I'm going to lay this one down. Run the ruler up around the bend in the tent pole and take a reading, and it says 42 inches. So the leg length for my main frame is going to be 42 inches. Automatically, the leg length for the secondary frame will be 3 inches less. The reason for that is it takes 3 inches for the fittings to be all in a pile and have the frames one on top of the other up here when they're in the storage position. That takes care of the main leg length. It takes care of the secondary leg length. I've got to get 2 more measurements. Now, this is fact. This was bent on the bender. But where would I measure from? If I were looking for a layout width, I want it from this point to this point, but where is that? Is it here, 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 or here? And there is no here. There's 2 known facts on this, and that's all. There's this mark, which is in relation to the bender, and there's a center line on the boat. Those are known facts. And the formula for the bender is this: to take a straight piece of pipe and lay it out and bend the leg length. You mark the leg length. You take the layout width of the frame minus 20 inches, which is a constant figure. It's always 20. And that will get you across the frame to the start of the next leg length. That's the whole formula that goes with the bending system. That's all you have to memorize. Leg length, width minus 20 inches, and leg length. And you can lay out a piece of tubing and bend it and know that it's going to come out the way you want it. So back to where I was at. I've got my frame laying here. This is the way it's really going to look when it's all done. It's laying here on the boat. It will store because it goes down in between the bow rail. When it comes up in the air like this, it's going to make a nice pleasing line coming up for the side of the spray hood. It's going to make a nice pleasing angle coming up from the front of the combing up to this frame, level out, and go back to the wings. So now I got a way to get my layout width. What is the weight? I've got 2 known facts: a center line and a leg length. Measure from the center line to the leg length on this bent tent pole, which is 7 inches. Double it, which is 14, which puts it over to this leg length. Add 20, and we're going to bend these frames laid out to 34 inches wide. So that's the layout width. Now, why did I bother to add 20? When I get back in on the bending table, I'm going to take it right back off again. Because the way we work our shop is that everybody in the shop knows the formula for the bender. And when I write it down on my work order, I'm going to put down the fact that I want a set of frames that have a layout width of 34 inches. And every person in that shop will use the same formula, and they'll take 34 minus 20, and they will put 2 leg length marks 14 inches apart with a center line in the middle. So you'll always bring the formula back to square one. I've got my leg lengths, I've got my layout width, I've got a tentative mark on where I'm going to mount it. So I measure from one side of the boat to the other, and note the fact that I need my mounting width be 66 inches. And I have all the information necessary to write up my work order, figure out what it's going to cost to build this product. But this is how you go about designing frames. And again, this is the best measuring device that I've ever come up with because it works on convertible tops, Bimini tops, spray hoods, Dodgers, the whole works. So at this point in time, we're going to go back and write up the work order and figure the price for this customer and see if we can sell it. Using the information that we've measured off of the boat, we're going to proceed to bend the frames for it. We're going to be using 1-inch stainless steel. I'd like to review just for a second. We decided on the boat that the main frame is going to have a leg length of 42 inches. The secondary frame is going to have a leg length of 39 inches. We're going to have a layout width of 36 inches with a mounting width of 66 inches. And we're going to try to achieve getting the legs of the frame to follow the combing on the boat, as we discussed out on the boat. Same rules. Take a 20-foot piece of tubing, measure up here 42 inches for the leg length, and put an arrow about halfway around the tubing. Line the arrow up on the backboard on the bending area. Take the layout width of 34 inches minus 20 And we put another arrow at 14 inches. While we're standing right here, we're going to go in half of 14, a line with a C through it for the center line, and come down here another 42 inches for the leg on the other side of the frame. And come down to K for cut. Now, because we're getting this out of a 20-foot length of tubing, I'm going to lay it out from the other end also so that I can make one bend and do two cuts, which is what will save us time. The secondary frame calls for a 39-inch leg. So I'm going to measure up from this end, 39 inches. Put my arrow for leg length, leave 34. Minus 20 means that I have to come up here 14 inches for the next leg length. Slash in the middle with a C through it for the center line, and the secondary leg length of 39 inches. And the reason I've done it in this sequence is that now I can make one bend for the first leg and make two cuts and do all this with half the effort. And that's my aim in life. Bring the main leg down here, put the arrow on the leg length mark on the bender. This is 1-inch stainless steel, so you can be a bull about it if you want to, or you can use Bill, because I've taught 98-pound girls how to bend stainless steel tubing. So you just put a little more leverage on it. And because we're going to have this flare out quite a ways, we're not even going to bring it to a right angle. We're going to leave it out at about 60 degrees. And you'll notice that the bender works as a vise even for 1-inch stainless steel with all of that weight hanging out here. So down here somewhere, we've got two cuts to make. So to use one bent leg to make two cuts, come down and make this one first. We got another cut to make here. There's both frames cut, ready to bend with one bent leg. Remember the main frame. You have to bend the main frame, get it symmetrical and perfect, then we'll make the secondary frame match it. Leg length on the leg length mark on the bender. Stop short of a 90-degree angle. On a real narrow frame like this, you may or may not get any crown, but it's so narrow that if you don't, it doesn't matter. We're not going to get any crown, so we're not going to worry about it. But what we do want to do is this. We want to have the legs have a crown built into them so that they'll follow the combing on the boat. And the way you can do that with this bender is start at the bottom end here and put a mark every 12 inches up the frame. And on a leg this short, I'd put 2 marks there, 2 over on this side. And usually on these marks, I'll put them all the way around the frame so I don't have to hunt for them. And what we're going to do here is use the frame bender and crown the legs as well as the middle. On the other frames, we always crown the middle. This one, we're going to crown the legs. And don't get carried away with this. You can adjust it, you can make it as you need it. So I'm just going to put a little bit of crown in each leg using those marks. And what I've got now is a crown built into the leg so it'll follow the lines of the boat. Now this is by guess, and by gosh, I hope I hit it. But if I don't hit it, I can always bring it back to the bender. I can straighten it out, or I can put a little more crown in it, whatever I happen to need. Now what we're going to do is check and see if we know the layout is right because we did it according to the formula that we have. What we have to worry about now is make sure that we got 66 inches wide at the bottom and 2 equilateral triangles. Now I've got 62 inches. So I got a little tough and brought it a little too far in. And I've got both of them equal, so I'm going to push both legs out just a little bit. And the way you widen the frame out, let the bender support the crown, put it clear into the bender like this, and just push the legs out a little bit. And there's very little spring to stainless steel, so don't get carried away with it. Now we got 66 inches. We got 46 1/4 to the center there. And we got 45 3/4 to the center there. So here's what I've accomplished. Got it goofed up a little bit. I've got too wide of a triangle here and too narrow of a triangle on this side. Just to double check myself. Okay, 46 1/4. So what I got to do is bring this leg in just a little bit. Put it back on the leg length mark on the bender. Bring it in a little bit. Flip this around. This leg's got to go out just a little bit. You'll notice it doesn't take very much because there's no spring back to stainless steel. I've still got 66 inches. I've got 46. And I've got 46 to the center. So I've got a frame that's 66 inches wide at the mounting point, like I decided I needed. And I've got some crown in the legs so that it'll follow the contours of the side of the boat, because this is where it stores. Now, this frame is done. This is perfect. The other one has to match it. Now, there's one difference that I have to make here. This leg length was 3 inches shorter, so this necessarily has to be crowned the same amount that the other one was. And so in order to make it crown the same, you have to follow the same rules. Now this leg was cut 3 inches shorter, so this crown mark that I'm going to put on, the first one, I'm going to put it 9 inches from the end as opposed to 12, which makes it come out even with that one. And I'm going to come up here 12 more inches and put this crown mark on. So we're going to come up 9 inches from this end and another 12 inches and run these marks all the way around, and these are again for the crowning of the leg. And you do this on a lot of Dodgers, because Dodgers are not built square and ugly. Dodgers are built so that they follow the lines of the boat. So with this particular bender, you can create a semicircle framework if that's what you're trying to design for a sailboat. My pegs are a little high, but we'll put it up there and see if it falls on my head. Now I'm going to bend the secondary frame and make it match the main frame. I'm going to stop a little shorter this time because I learned on the first one. I hope you all notice how much easier it is using bill as opposed to pure bull strength. Plus you have total control over what you're doing. All right, I tried to crown the other one, couldn't. So what I come back and do is crown the legs so that they'll match the other frame. Same rules. So now what I'm going to do is check and see if the two frames match. Line up the center marks, leg length marks, and I've got to pull those legs in a little bit further. This one is fine on the starboard side. The port side's got to come in a little bit. And I only had to come in about 3 inches, so I'm putting the persuader on to help me so I got total control of it rather than a jerk on it. This one's in just a little bit too far. On these small frames like this, you can't be sloppy and let them be off a ½ inch, because if you do, you put a bind on the fittings and it doesn't work. And we got plenty of time to do this because I think I spent maybe 10 minutes doing this, trying to get a set of frames perfect. In our particular shop, this set of frames would be selling for about $180. And you all can figure out the cost of the tubing just as well as I can, so you can see that it's a great way to make a whole bunch of money and have the product that you want. At this point, we've come back from the bending station. We've installed the frames on the boat based on the information that we took when we measured for the frame design. So we've gone ahead and drilled and put the mounting brackets on the boat. We've had the frames laying here and we've raised them up and down to make sure that there's no torque in the fittings so that we don't have to worry about tearing it off of the boat. The other thing that we've done ahead of time to save a little bit of time is we have established the perimeter of the spray hood all the way around the boat, and we've used this combing as being the edge of the spray hood. We also have stopped it back at this snap right here so that when our wing comes back the way this pole is facing, it will hold the spray hood up. The reason I bring up these snaps is this: you can make all kinds of products on the boat and get yourself in all kinds of trouble if you don't get your snap lines straight and symmetrical. So what we do is, again, we find the center line of the boat, and in this particular case we could not put a snap on the center line because there's a cleat in the way. So we went even amounts each side of center line, and we put our male snaps in the boat. And you'll notice that these are about 4 to 5 inches apart. Why are they that close together? Because this is a spray hood. It's expected to stand up when you plow through a wave and take a lot of water into the boat. So on spray hoods and Dodgers, we try to keep our snaps somewhere in the area of 4 to 6 inches apart, no more. This holds the edge down so it doesn't leak. So now we have our snaps in the boat. We've established a perimeter of the product. We've got this frames bent, and we've come out here ready to go to work. The problem is I'm getting tired and old, so I ain't going to work anymore. So I let my two assistants, Sally Nichols and Becky Abrazino, do all this work, and I'm just going to tell you how they're going to do it. We've got some certain tools that we use, and I'll go through them real quick. This is the famous Ethel I've been talking about in some of the other tapes, and nobody's ever seen her before, but this is Ethel. So we use Ethel and a few other things to make this job a little bit easier. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Becky and Sally, and they're going to show you how we tape up the frames ready to pattern. Now what they're going to do is pick the front frame, you'll notice, by the way, is on the bottom of the pile. Why? Because it has to be that way for storage purposes. So we're going to use Ethel to hold the front frame up because it gets it fairly rigid. Then we bring the secondary frame back to the position where we want it. Now we originally, when we talked to the customer and sold the job, we had decided that we wanted to have this frame approximately 42 inches off the floor. And why? Because when you're standing at the helm back here, you want to be able to see over the product. This is put on here to protect material that's put in here, or gear, or people. But you still have to be able to see over it, because when you have salt water on glass, you can't see through it. So we established that we were going to have these approximately 42 inches off of this foredeck right here. So now they can go ahead and start taping it up. What we use for taping these frames up is a fiberglass reinforced strapping tape. It's the only tape we found that's strong enough to hold this, and I'll say it now and I'll say it 14 more times probably. When you think you've got a job taped up solid enough to pattern it, add a little bit more to it, because what happens in the system of patterning that we use, if you have the frames move at any point during the patterning process, everything that you did before that has become garbage. So we maybe use an excess of tape sometimes, but for a $3.50 roll of tape, it's well worth it to make sure that it doesn't move while we're patterning. You'll also notice that we got real efficient on this set of frames. We had our markings on it for bending. We cleaned them all up because we didn't want to have to do it after we got in the boat. What you probably can't see, but it is there. We have the center line on the frames, and it's in the form of a ding right here. And it's on that frame. And if you remember right, I told you when we started this whole project that the only thing right on this boat is the center line. So we have to have the center line on the frames. And we use a center punch to mark it, because that way it does not wear off. And we can always find it, even in the future. So go ahead and keep taping it up, girls. Yeah, hook one up there on that snap, bring it up around back to here. One on this side, same way. Now you can see why I let the girls do this, because I can't squat down like she does. It hurts too bad. You notice that the way the tape's being put around those snaps up forward keeps the tape out of the way of making the pattern. Because all of these snaps were put in the boat ahead of time for a particular reason. And the reason is this: they're little helpers. And you can pattern this particular job in the wind and the rain and every other miserable thing that they can throw at you. Many of you people get to do this in a building like we are today, but we're not always that lucky. Most of our boats here in Florida are in the water, in a marina. The wind's always blowing, the boat's always rocking, and we sometimes have a hangover, so you got to have everything to your advantage so that you can get a good pattern. All right, now that we got these tapes on, and again, I want to make a point. If you people are brand new at it, add some more tape. We know exactly every move we're going to make, so sometimes we don't use quite as much as you do. The other thing is, this is still floating right here, so she's going to hook down here to a snap or to some fixed object on the boat, as in maybe this deck eye that's right here, and come up and put a tape back here to hold this frame back tight. It's always easier to go from the fixed object to the movable one than it is the other way around. All right, now I need to stop here just a minute and explain something that we do. This particular tape here can be put anywhere we want to put it. But when you have a very difficult customer, and some of them are, because on Dodgers and spray hoods, they're a very individual thing. And everybody has a particular idea how it should be. If you'll notice, this particular tape here is basically in line with that last snap, and where I move this up and down on this frame will determine where the material is going to be. And if you got a real difficult customer, you can have him meet you at the boat the day that you're going to be doing your patterning, and you can say, "Sir, please be at the boat at 10:15 because I want you to see what the product is going to look like before I even build it." And if you stop and think a minute and look at this product that we're building, this is all material from here clear around to the other side. Where you move this, sometimes one lousy inch, especially on a Dodger, will make all the difference whether you have a happy customer or an unhappy one. So we use the tape as a tool to hold it up to get our pattern. We also use it as a tool to sell with. And you can save yourself a whole lot of grief. Now, you can't work for nothing and do that, and we don't work for nothing. But it's a way of showing them what the finished product's going to look like before we've pulled the first pattern. And I always tell the customers, look, I will change anything you want until I've pulled the first pattern. Then you bought the farm. So be here, then you got it. Okay, girls, go ahead and measure out now for your shrink wrap. And we pattern these with shrink wrap. Back there's the work order. This is our original work order that we had for purposes of measuring the frames. So we use the same piece of paper, and we go down here in the bottom, and I'm going to draw you an exploded view real quick of what this Dodger is going to look like when the patterns are all made. And all this is a place to put down information so that we can go cut the shrink wrap. And we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces. And what we do is put the size of the piece that we need to pattern on this sheet of paper. Then we go to the table and cut out the shrink wrap. And instead of putting a number on it, or I mean a measurement, we put a number. And the reason we do that is this. When we come back out to the boat, we put the pile of shrink wrap in the boat. Whatever number we pick up, we pattern the opening that has to be patterned by that number. Now, let me stop you one more time. Here's what has to be patterned for a spray hood or a Dodger, okay? The opening that's created by this frame, that combing, that snap, and a point up here is one pattern. You have the same pattern on the other side of the boat. The opening that's created by this frame and that frame to that V is a pattern. The other opening, and we haven't got it all yet, is the opening that's created by that frame, that combing, and a dot down here. All right now I'm going to have the girls put that dot on the boat. Okay, and what that is this. They have to find the center line of this frame and run it to infinity. And where it would hit this boat, right at the bottom of the combing, is where they put the dot. They're also going to put a dot back here, which will be the corner of the wing. They're also going to pick a spot up here and put a dot for the corner of the wing up at the top. Now when they do this one over here, and they're going to do it with the center punch, how do we get from there to here? We measure from the center line dot to this dot and make it happen over here. That way everything stays symmetrical. So now they're going to go ahead and put these dots on the boat. Sally, why don't you hold it for us so everybody can see, because usually we do this alone, but when we're trying to show a whole group of people, this is how we do it. What she's doing is finding the center line of that frame, running it to infinity, and where it hits the gunnel of the boat, she's going to put a dot. And by a dot, I mean a dot. I don't mean a period that's 14 inches across. I'm talking about a little tiny dot. She's going to pick a spot up here, and we have already discussed with the customer that this is the outline of the wing, right? Right. So right up here on the center line of this frame, she's going to put a center punch mark. All right, now she's going to go down here, and because we have a snap down here, we have to get an imaginary line so that we finish about 1.5 inches after this last snap. So 1.5 inches after that, she's going to put a dot right here on the gunnel where the combing comes down to the gunnel. Okay, Sally, you want to measure from the center dot here to that dot, or don't you want to crawl down here? The girls get upset at me because I make them work the little tiny dots, okay? And while they're doing this, I'm going to show you something else that upsets me. When we get into the patterning sequence, and if you're going to be a good pattern maker, you either learn this or don't get in the business, because if you don't do it this way, you're going to create garbage. So when we draw a line on this frame, you go ahead on that side, Beck, and I'll just talk. I'm better at talking than I am working. But when we're making this pattern, we're going to be drawing a line on it, and we're going to be using our finger as a scribe. And we're going to be using a Sharpie, because that's what it is. It's sharp, and it gives you an indelible mark that stays on the pattern. So I'm going to ask the girls when they do it to draw a line up this frame, and that's what it's going to look like. The problem with that is that most people, when they start out in this business, they can see that line. As blind as I am at 65, I can see that line. But they are totally convinced that line's going to jump up and run away. So they put it on there, and then they come back and they do it again. And then just to damn guarantee it, they do it one more time. All right, now I've gone from 1/16 of an inch wide to 1/4 of an inch wide, and the interpretation of that line on two sides of a pattern will make all the difference in the world of whether your pattern is good or garbage. And you can look at every product you make, and if it becomes very loose, it means you had a big wide line, and somebody interpreted one side wrong compared to the other side. You can do a fine line. We can't work to 1,000th like a machinist, but we can work to a 64th, and while you're around me, you will, or you're gone. So when you draw your lines, you draw fine lines because you can all see them. I drew this exploded view of this Dodger, and I put some numbers in it. The girls are going to measure what would be the largest piece of shrink wrap that they would need to pattern the opening that I've been talking about. And they're going to write those figures by these numbers. And then we're going to go cut the shrink wrap. But we need to take the measurements. So girls, go ahead and measure it out. Usually what we do is measure the longest dimension halfway around and double it on this front piece. And when you take that dimension, add a couple 3 inches to it, because the shrink wrap is not that expensive. Go ahead, tell her, Sal.
11 and a half
Feet.
feet. By 4 feet.
The reason she went 4 feet over here, it only looks like about 2. But material does crazy things when it goes around multiple curves, as this is. And again, the shrink wrap is not that expensive, so make sure you don't have to run all the way back to the truck just to get another piece.
4 feet. By 10 feet. 4'6". By 4 foot.
Okay, at this point in time, we have all the necessary information to go and cut the shrink wrap so that we can come back out here and pattern this. So we're going to stop at this point in time and go and cut our shrink wrap, and then we'll show you how to pattern it. On each frame, we run a strip of our strapping tape, and then on top of that, we run a strip of seam tape. Now what seam tape is a two-phase tape that we use when we're sewing seams together to make them waterproof. It also works as a tool for patterning. That's why you see this white paper on it. and sometimes it's kind of a pain to get it started, but you'll see when we start the pattern how nice it works. I can never get done being clumsy, but there's what you peel off in order to stick the shrink wrap to it. I need to talk about the shrink wrap just a second. The shrink wrap is a 6mm opaque vinyl, and we buy it by the roll, and we have it in rolls that are 12 feet wide and 175 feet long. And the reason we do that is we sell quite a lot of it to people that want to use it as a patterning medium, and it's a size roll that we can ship UPS. It's also a size roll that works easy in the shop or in a mobile shop to carry around when you have to cut off pieces to pattern with. So that's the medium that we're going to be using to pattern. And there are shrink wrap on the market, and there's visqueen on the market. Visqueen will not work. It won't work in the heat because it'll sag, and it won't work in the cold because it'll contract. So we stick to the thing that works, which is shrink wrap. And there's a lot of shrink wrap on the market, and some of that is garbage. So we've found a company that has it folded in such a way that it's folded into a 4-foot roll, and the folds are in either 12-inch increments or 24-inch increments, which makes it easy for us to cut our pieces without picking the tape up real often. But mainly it works very well because when you're patterning, if you can see your mistake before you make it, you don't have to make it. One more statement. If you're going to be a pattern maker, be very deliberate and think about what you're going to do. If you're going to be a rush person, don't start it because you can't do it. A good pattern maker is probably the slowest person in the world, and I'm one of those slow people. But you have to be slow and deliberate in order to make good patterns that will come out and have the product look like it should be. I'm going to let the girls start with the shrink wrap while I keep yakking a little bit here, so go ahead, girls. We've already gone ahead and put the tape on the frames because we're in a nice closed building here where we have no wind to contend with.
Number one.
But sometimes when we're out in the world, we've got a lot of wind to contend with. So this string of clamps that I have around my neck, these are 3201T pony clamps. And they're the only ones I've found that work correctly for patterning. Why do they work right? Because they're exactly the right size that when I put it on the frame, it fits the frame. And I can go out in a 20-mile-an-hour wind and pattern a spray hood or a Dodger using a combination of clamps and the seam tape and have it come out right. You'll also notice another tool that Sally's using up front there, which is just some old scrap binding that we had kicking around. And we put a snap every 8 to 10 inches down through the whole length of it. And the reason we did that is we're too lazy to pick up individual snaps. But by putting it on the binding as we did there, we can use the snaps over the shrink wrap. She's snapping the shrink wrap right to the male snaps. The other thing that she's doing, they're getting ready to stick it on the top. As she comes around the bottom, forming that material around there, she's making little cuts because you can't bend material two ways just like you can't bend a board two ways. So she's making little relief cuts to get it to come up and fit up to the combing. All of this can be done by one person also. The reason we're using two people is that we're making tapes here that are supposed to be educational, and we don't want them to cost $10 million to get them made, so we're using two people. But everything that we're doing here can be done by one person. If you'll notice how they're working here, they're a combination of hooking it to the snaps and sticking it to the seam tape on the frame, pulling against so that the part that they're looking at looks good. Now what Becky did just there is fine here in the shop, but don't do it out in the water because you got the EPA or somebody all over your case about it. What she did was she chopped off a piece of shrink wrap and let it go on the ground. In the shop, we do that. Out in the real world, on a boat, in the water, we don't do it because you don't want to pollute the waters. Another word of warning about shrink wrap. When you cut excess pieces off to get them out of your way, like the one that Becky's working on right now, she's going to be cutting a big piece off here. If you happen to be patterning a bimini top with a full enclosure on a fly bridge, and you cut that piece off, and you lay it on the bridge floor and step on it accidentally, it's just like a piece of ice and it'll throw you overboard. So make sure your scraps are either put in a bucket or a box or clamped to something so that they're not in the way. You notice how the girls tape the frames up. They're younger than I am, so they can stand in these little tiny holes. I can't, so I make the holes a little bit bigger for me, so I do a little different style of taping, but mainly it's so that I can get my weird old body in there. You can see over here on what Sally's doing on the other side, maybe, where she's forming it by herself, same as Becky's forming it by herself on this side. Okay, next step, mark the pattern, okay? Now what Sally's going to do is mark the pattern at the finish edge below the snap line, okay? And what Becky is going to do is she's going to mark on the frame where the seam would be after the product is sewed together. And your next question should be, where should I mark? So Becky is down here drawing the finish edge. She's going to put the dot on down here that is in line with the seam line on the frame. And just to make sure she doesn't lose that little dot, because it's a little tiny dot, she may put an arrow pointing up. So that arrow is going to tell her that she has to look for some place to connect that dot to, which is part of the dot system of patterning that we use. The next thing she's going to do is draw the line on the frame where the seam should be. And she's using her fingers as a scribe with the Sharpie in between them, drawing a fine line on the shrink wrap. And your next question should be, where should the line be drawn? Well, if you look at the product, you're going to have a piece of material here and one down there. So the intersection of those two pieces of material on the frame is where you draw the line. They represent the seam. When we get on the cutting table, we will make our seam allowances accordingly. What Sally is doing is continuing on marking around the finished perimeter of the front panel of the spray hood. She also is in the process of putting the center lines on, which are on the frame and they're on the boat. And you make sure that you get the center lines on every pattern. The next thing she's going to do, I think, is write 2 new words in your vocabulary. As of today, you got 2 new words to talk about. One is pout, and the other one is sout. And every pattern on every boat for every product will have pout and sout on it. And here's why. Our patterning medium is opaque. When we get it on the cutting table, we don't know which is in and out. And pout and sout is so weird that if you lay the pattern down and you can read that word, you know that you have the pattern face up on the cutting table. And this is what we want. And here's what the 2 words stand for. Port, outside, starboard, outside. But that's too much to write, so we use pout and sout. The other thing that we always do is every pattern, before it comes off of the boat, has the customer's name put on it. Why? We might go out and pull patterns for 3 days. We might pull 15 patterns. So we put the customer's name on every pattern. That way, if we get one mixed up, we can always put it back where it belongs. So what we have here is our center lines, pout, sout, customer's name, perimeter of the pattern around the snap line. The snaps are automatically marked because we use the female snap on them. And we have our seam line on the framework down here. We have a dot down on the bottom here and a dot on the bottom on the other side that we're going to connect to the line. And that's all there is to that pattern. It's that easy. A spray hood or a Dodger normally will either have a roll-up panel in the front to let air in, or in this case, we'll make a roll-down panel so that we can get out to put the anchor out. So we have to pick a spot up on the forward edge of the combing up here as a place where we can put in a zipper on each side. In this case, we're going to put in a frown, which is an upside-down smile. So Sally's going to take over here beside the snap on the side. Take that one right there, Sal, right at the curve on the inside. Yeah, between the two snaps. She's going to draw a straight line and put a squiggly line through it. And what that stands for is the fact that we're going to put a zipper in that's going to go up, over, and over to the same place on the other side. Then we'll sew a piece of glass in there and a U-shaped zipper so that the customer can unzip it, drop it, and get out to take care of his anchor. She's going to circle the snaps. The reason for this is, and we do not put the snaps in at the shop. We install the snaps on the boat because sometimes a 64th of an inch on the snap will make the difference between a good-looking product and one that looks terrible. So we mark these snaps. The other thing that it does is this. This whole system has been developed over the years as a system, and you cannot change it. If you start making minor changes in it, then it gets progressively worse, and pretty soon you got nothing. But by using this total system the way we're explaining it today, if you make a mistake, and let's say that you've driven 30 miles to do a job on a boat, and you forget one thing, as long as you have the system, 95% of the time you can recreate the thing back on the cutting table and save driving all the way back out to the boat. So that was the other reason for coming up with this system of patterning. When you peel the shrink wrap off, peel it back. Don't just jerk it off because you have a tendency to pull the tape off. Next thing they're going to do is pattern the top panel. They're going to lay it on there centered. They're going to pull against each other up here at the top, pull it down until it looks that nice. And one of the things you have to learn about patterning, whether you use material, shrink wrap, or paper, whatever you happen to decide you're going to use, more patterns are goofed up because people start fighting with them. So lay the pattern down, let the material do what it wants to do, lay it down until it looks nice, and stick it down or clamp it or pin it or whatever system you use. But don't fight with the pattern. Don't cut the tape, don't bump the frame. Now the girls are not as clumsy as I am, but I've been known to make that same cut Becky just made and cut a great big old hole right here. And years ago when I was patterning with the material, man, I was a pro at cutting a hole there. And that was one of the places where I did a lot of Dodgers, and I covered up my mistake by sewing a patch on there and putting a patch on the other side that two wrongs make a right. The difference between using material and shrink wrap for patterning is this. If I screw up down here, all I got to do is take a piece of tape and tape another piece to it and redo it. Okay, this one went on real fast. It's one of the easiest ones to do. So they're going to mark the center lines. They're going to draw the line on the frame. It's the intersection between this piece and the next piece, which represents the seam line. And all the time you're doing this, you're using your fingers as a scribe, letting them ride on the frame. Now we don't get too carried away down in this V down here by making sure that that line goes all the way to the intersection, and here's why. You cannot find the exact center of these fittings where the intersection would be. So we'll stop anywhere up in this area here. When we get on the cutting table, we can lay a straight edge on this line and run it to infinity, lay it on this line and run it to infinity, and we will have the exact center of that intersection. and there will never be a little bubble there. Again, the things that have got to be done on this is going to be the seam line, the center line, the pout, the sout, customer's name. And if you're brand new at this business, you can write fore and aft on it if you want to. Well, we forget it half the time, but you have to have some form of identification of this piece because it's so symmetrical on the table that you don't know which edge goes forward and which goes aft. So that's why if I get it into your brain to use pout and sout, then you'll never get goofed up, because if you can read it, you know that the port side is the pout side. Let me show them one thing here that you did, girls. Y'all notice right here that she put the dot, she put a snap, and they don't even apply to this piece. But it's a habit that we've gotten into, because if there's a pattern draped over a mark, we put the mark on. This is how, when we get back to the shop, if we screwed up something and forgot something, we can recreate the problem and solve it at the shop, because I'll guarantee you we could lay this dot onto the dot on that piece and the dot that's going to be on the wing over here, and we could solve a whole bunch of problems back at the shop. Go ahead. Okay, now, because we live in a totally imperfect world, and because we all get nervous making these tapes, but I've also gotten old enough to where I can make mistakes and have fun doing it. Otherwise, I might as well be dead. So I'm going to tell you all about a mistake that was just made. And then we're going to recreate the whole problem and solve it when we get on the cutting table. When we had this piece on the middle here, and I think I'm right, you didn't mark the wing, right? Right. I got busy talking and I wasn't watching, and they got busy worrying and fretting, and so what we did, we forgot to mark the dot here that it determines where the wing is going to attach. So what we're going to do now is make darn sure that we got the point where the wing attaches to the product, which is represented by this little dot right up here. Now, by the same token, we have no way of knowing where that is. So what we're going to do is measure from the center line to this dot, and we're going to make a note on here. And when we get back on the cutting table, we're going to transfer that information back onto this piece. And I didn't plan on this happening this way, but this is the way the world is, so we'll just take it as it comes. So right now, Becky, before we forget again, measure from the center line to the dot and write a note over here, the dimension from the center to the wing attachment point to go on this piece. Now the reason I really didn't plan this, but it happened, okay? And it's just as well that it did happen, because it's going to happen to you people when you get out in the world. So we now know that we're going to measure 13 3/4 inches from the center line on this piece that was made for here out, and we're going to put a dot which represents where this wing attaches to it. The other thing that I want you to understand is this. One of the reasons that we use shrink wrap for patterning as opposed to the finished material is this. I got lost. The reason we use the shrink wrap for patterning is this. People working together in a shop, as in a husband and wife, or two people, or enemies, or friends, or whatever, you cannot read each other's minds. And I've trained a lot of people in the world now that go out and they can work together well enough, as these girls and I can, where I make my patterns, the girls can work them and cut it out, and it comes out right. Why? Because I don't expect the girls to read my mind, and I don't read their mind. If we made a screw up right here, we make a note. then there's no reason to have a problem with it, okay? You are the pattern maker. If you're out and something goes to pot on you, or if you want something sewed up in a certain sequence, it's your business to tell your seamstress, I want it done this way. Then she doesn't have to sit at the sewing machine and fret and worry about why something isn't coming out right. You're on the boat. You don't know, you know what the problem is, she doesn't. So write her a note. Most of you are going to say, well, do I have to pattern the other wing on the other side? And yes, you have to pattern the other wing on the other side. Why? Boats aren't built plumb, level, and square. They're built crooked. Back to the old rule, okay? We found the center line, and we are building to the center line. But I'd almost bet $1,000 that when we make that pattern and lay it on top of this one, they will not be equal. Because this boat is torqued a little bit on the trailer. These might be out of whack just a little bit. If we're off a 1/16 of an inch down there in the mounting, it can take the frame and throw it out by a 1/16 of an inch. And that don't sound like much, but it is when you lay one pattern on top of the other. I got a couple things I have to tell you about. The reason people will not do Dodgers and spray hoods is right here. Because everybody assumes that because something was patterned and cut, that it has to be sewed from the front of the boat to the back of the boat. And that is not true. And most people that start to do Dodgers do one and then they quit. And the reason is they try to sew the product together from the front to the back and it doesn't work. And where doesn't it work? It doesn't work right here. And the reason it doesn't work right here on any Dodger, any spray hood, look at this junction. And sew the product together in such a way that you never have to sew this around this corner. Now, if you stop and think about it a minute, if you use the old rules of sewing from the front to the back, you'd try to sew this piece to this piece, and then when you sewed this wing on, you'd have to come down here and sew around the corner, right? Well, nobody can do that, and nobody can do it right face to face, and nobody can do it right top sewing. So when you're sewing up Dodgers or spray hoods, and they're the same identical thing, they're just on a different looking boat, look at this junction right here. Sew it together in such a way that you don't sew around the corners. So what we're going to do is this. When we sew this parts together, we're going to sew the wing to the top and top sew it. Then we're going to sew the front to the wing and the top, face to face, and then top sew it. And we'll be sewing straight across this junction every time, never around it. If you learn that and learn the secrets of patterning it like this, then Dodgers and spray hoods are no more difficult than a bimini top or convertible top. Okay, the girls have just finished patterning the starboard wing. I need to back up just a second here, okay? When they patterned the port wing, okay, they drew the line down the frame. They had a short line on the frame. They had the dot. They had the edge of the combing here. They had the dot here, and a dot up here for the wing to attach. Now what you didn't see was them trying to draw a line down this tape. This tape was put here to represent to the customer the finish edge of this wing. And it was just a monkey see, monkey do thing. When we get on a cutting table in here, and this is the reason for the dot system of patterning, we're going to take a straight edge and lay it on this dot at the bottom and this dot at the top and draw a straight line. That's why it's called the dot system of patterning. There's many places where it's totally impossible to get a good line on the boat. So with the dots, you can solve a whole bunch of problems by drawing a straight line on a cutting table. As we get into other products, you'll see the same things happening because this is called the dot system of patterning, and it works on every kind of a pattern that you'd ever want to make. That wraps up our patterning sequence for a spray hood. Just a reminder, take your time on it, get pout, sout, center line, customer's name, and the dots. We've arrived back at the cutting table. We've pulled the patterns for the Dodger, or the spray hood on our boat, which is the equivalent of a Dodger on a sailboat. And we're going to work our patterns so that we can get them ready to put on the material to cut out. What we have here is the front part of that spray hood. How do I know that? because I have a snap line down around here, and I have a line that represents a line on the frame, which is going to be the seam. How do I know I've got it right? Because I've got sout pointing up and pout pointing up, and I can read them. So what the girls are going to do now is connect this line to this dot, and this line to this dot. If you remember right, that was a dot that was put on the boat, which was an extension of the center line of the frame. The reason it was done that way is because there was fittings in the way and we couldn't get a good mark. This gives us a perfect mark. Next thing is look at the pattern, decide what's got to happen to it. This is going to be the finish edge. This is going to be a sewed edge to another part. So we're going to put a 1/2 inch seam allowance over here, and we're going to cut on the line down here. Remember, if you can't cut a 1/2 inch seam allowance, put little marks so that you do get it. A dodger or a spray hood is very critical. They're small. They don't cut you any slack. They're either right or wrong. This is, again, why I'm a fanatic about fine lines and about exact measurements. 1/2 inch seam allowance. We're going to cut a 1/2 inch and we're going to sew a 1/2 inch. Because if you don't, what you're going to get is a spray hood that's either too loose or too tight. So like I said, if you can't cut a 1/2 inch like these girls are, measure it and do it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to continue on this piece, and I'm going to show you a trick way of getting a frown in here. Okay? Usually we call it a smile because it's with the curls up. This is called a frown because it's down. But in order to get the frown so that it looks right on the boat, we have 2 marks on each side of the center. Whatever the dimension is from center to the mark, make it happen at the top and draw 2 straight lines straight up through the top, girls, if you will. And I'm going to call one of my helpers and see if they would be so kind as to hand me my bent tent pole, which I see over on the other table. Thank you.
13.
You all remember that when we were out on the boat, we used this bent tent pole to measure for the frame. It's got a 9-inch radius up here. I've found that it works as a perfect radius to lay out the windows for my smiles and my frowns, because usually I never can find anything that's round anywhere else, so I use the bent tent pole for that purpose. So in order to get that right, we're going to measure down from the edge 2 inches here and the edge 2 inches over here and draw a straight line between those. And most people would end up looking for a compass or a piece of thread and a pencil or a big top off of a cardboard tube or something to get a round curve. I just carry my bent tent pole all day long, and that's how I use it, okay? So to get a nice gentle curve up here that a zipper will work real easy around, lay it up to this line here and bring the leg length mark up to the top line and draw a line around it and reverse it over on this side. Keep it parallel to the vertical line. Lay the leg length up to the other line and draw your circle in. And now you got a nice gentle curve that a number 10 zipper will work around. So this is what's going to be the frown when we get ready to sew this up. We'll also be sewing a piece of glass in here so that the customer can see out. So now we'll lay this aside and bring up the next piece to get busy and work with it. Okay, what we've got here is the starboard wing. How do I know that? It says sout. And we got a dot up here off of the frame, and we got a dot out down here from the boat, and we're going to connect those 2 dots with a straight line. Down here, we have to continue this line to infinity and run this line to infinity or the dot, and that will give us the exact intersection at the junction of the frames. And don't try to straighten something that's not straight. Make sure that this ruler is laying along the straight part of this line down here. Don't try to straighten it out from up here because it's not a straight line. All right, now connect that line to this dot And I said to you out on the boat, don't fight for the center line of the intersection. Let the straight lines down here do it for you. Now think about what you're going to do again, okay? Snap line, finish cut. This has to be sewed to another part, so we need a 1/2 inch allowance here. This is going to be sewed to another part, so we need a 1/2 inch seam allowance here. And this is the pull part of the wing, so we cut the line here. Okay, we can lay this aside. Now we get the port wing. It says pout, it says wing. We got the same series of things to connect together. We got to connect the dot on the frame to the dot on the boat. We have to take this line and run it to that dot. We have to take this line, the straight part of it, not the curved part, and run it to infinity. That becomes the intersection on the two fittings. Again, 1/2 inch, finish cut, finish cut. Okay, everybody look at this little note right here. It says 13 3/4 inches from center to wing attachment. Probably everybody's forgotten except me, but when I make a mistake, man, I remember it for a long time. Remember when we had the top half of the Dodger on the frame, we neglected to put the dots on where the wing attaches to the top panel. So right now we're going to start working on the top panel and we're going to solve that problem right there before we do any cutting. Okay, south, out, forward, aft. The forward panel is going to connect on down here. So what we're going to do right now is get these points cleaned up down here. What we have is a line with an arrow on it pointing to something. It's pointing to a dot. So she's going to connect the dot to the arrow. And we have the same thing on this other line, so we're going to connect them. Again, it gives us the intersection in the center line of the fittings without trying to find it on the fitting. Now, before we go any further, here's the center line on the aft end. And we have a wing over here that did not get a dot put on where it attaches. So we're going to come out here 13 3/4 inches and put a dot. And when we put that little dot there, we're going to write wing beside it, which we should have done on the boat. But we didn't do it. We're going to do the same thing over here. I hope this brings home the point to you that using this system of patterning with the dot system and the shrink wrap, you can make a mistake and not get killed for it. You'll be able to solve the problem rather than have to drive all the way back to the boat, as long as you stick with the system. Now we've fixed the problem. Now we look at this and say, what are we going to do with it? Well, we're going to sew it to other parts all the way around, so we have to make a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. Okay, for all intents and purposes, these patterns are what we call worked, and they're ready to go on the cutting table, cut out the material, and get ready to sew the project up. But before we close this deal up, I've got a couple things I want to show you. I'm going to lay this up here so that the camera can see what we've got. We're on the port side, okay, and I need the front panel. And here's where all the mystery of Dodgers and spray hoods goes away. In fact, let's kind of sandbag this a little bit, these two, so that they don't slip around because I've gotten clumsy. Okay. All right, there's a couple of points that I want to make. This junction right here, This junction right here determines whether you'll ever make another Dodger again as long as you live. Why? Because the sequence of sewing this together is determined by that junction. I said this out on the boat. I'm saying it again so you get it into your head. Look at these parts. They all have to be sewed together face to face, rolled over, and top sewed. Right, right. So look at this junction here, and if you had to sew any of these parts together and top sew them so that you wouldn't have to sew around that corner, the only way you could possibly do it would be to sew the wing to the top, face to face, open it up, top sew it, sew the front panel to the top and the wing, face to face, open it up, and top sew it. If you'll get that in your head, and the main frame determines which way you're going to sew them together. So if you get lost, here's a trick that I do sometimes, and sometimes I do it anyway because I may make this pattern today and we may not cut it and sew it up for a week, okay? So I'll try to draw this upside down. I don't even know if I can do it. But here's this boat that we're building this spray hood for. And we have a main frame here and a secondary frame swinging off from it right there, okay? And if I have to, I draw that picture right on my pattern. And that junction right there tells me which way to sew it together, because if the main frame was aft, and I'm going to draw you another picture just for purposes of explanation, because you may want to keep this. Here's the same boat, and I'm getting worse at drawing it upside down. But here's the same boat with the same spray hood, but let's say for some reason we decided to have the main frame aft. And I have no idea why that reason is, but it could happen. There's the same configuration of the spray hood. And right there is the same problem that we're looking at, okay? So the sequence of sewing this together, as opposed to this one, would be we'd have to sew the front panel to the top panel face to face, roll it over and top sew the same. Then we would have to sew the wing to the two parts, face to face, roll it over and top sew it, so that we'd never have to sew around that corner, as we wouldn't want to sew around this corner up here. So many times when I'm patterning a job that I may not work on for a week or so, I'll draw this picture right here. And I'm even make a note on here and say to the seamstress, please sew the wing to the top, and then the front panel to the wing and the top. That way there's no question for her, because she has not seen the boat. She doesn't know what you're doing. So make sure you give her that information. One more little piece of information, and I'll close this down. This wing right here, this edge is the pull edge of the wing. This snap down here determines whether that spray hood or Dodger is going to stay up tight on its own. This is the weakest link in the chain. So I've learned the hard way to always run the selve edge of the material down the pull edge of the wing. Why? Because the selve edge won't stretch. And not only that, to guarantee it, I'll bury a piece of vinyl on the inside and sew a separate facing over that. Why? So it can't stretch. And I always make sure that this facing and vinyl and the material are sewed all together into this seam where this wing connects to the top. That way I can put anything I want down here to pull on it real hard and make sure that it's going to stay back tight. If you try to do this on a bias cut, it's going to stretch and it's going to sag and it's going to look terrible.
The Marine Canvas Training Institute offers 1-week in-residence training seminars for basic boat canvas, advanced boat canvas, and boat upholstery, weekend training conferences, and daily one-on-one consulting. You may order other tapes in the Institute's video classroom series and the Marine Canvas Optimizer, its computer estimating program, by telephone or mail. Also available from the Institute are tool holsters, the Bend-Right Bender, the Bent Tent Pole Measuring Tool, Don Wedge's patented stainless steel snap dies, and other tools and equipment to help you run your business more effectively. For more information and a catalog, call, write, or fax the Marine Canvas Training Institute.